He threw her out while she carried his children. 5 years later, he saw the twins with his eyes. The hallway was silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere deep in the house. A sound too slow, too calm for the moment that was happening. Lily stood near the staircase, one hand resting on the curve of her stomach as if to shield the life growing inside. Her other hand held a small overnight bag, not because she had prepared to leave, but because some instinct had told her she needed to. Her heart pounded so loudly she could feel the rhythm in her fingertips. The home around her had once felt warm and safe, filled with soft light, delicate flowers on the windowsills, laughter echoing down the marble floors. Now it felt like a museum of illusions, a place where love had seemed real until it shattered. Andrew stood across the foyer from her. He looked like perfection carved from expensive stone, tall, broad-shouldered, blonde hair neatly styled, icy blue eyes that once softened when they looked at her. He had always held himself with the confidence of a man who shaped the world rather than moved inside it. Tonight, though, that confidence was tense, rigid, edged with something sharp and dangerous. His jaw was clenched. His hands were fists at his sides, not raised, but ready to wound with words instead of touch. She had told him only minutes earlier. She had taken a breath, placed her hand over her stomach, and said quietly, "I'm pregnant." The words had been filled with hopeful fear, the kind of fear that blooms when something is too precious to lose. She thought he might be surprised. She thought perhaps he would be silent at first, then move to her, touch her cheek, ask if she was all right, ask what she needed. She had let herself imagine, just for a moment, a future. But instead, his silence had chilled everything in the room. His eyes had changed first, the blue in them turned cold like winter ice. Then his expression collapsed into something she had never seen before. Not sadness. Not confusion. But anger. Fear disguised as fury. He took a step toward her, but not to reach her. "No," he said, his voice low, too controlled. "No, Lily. You don't understand. I cannot do this. I cannot have this. Not now. Not ever." His voice rose with every sentence, unraveling into something sharp and uneven. "You promised me. You said you were careful. You said this wouldn't happen." She felt the words hit her like blows, but she stayed still. She had known some part of him was afraid of vulnerability, of needing anyone, of letting anyone inside the steel fortress he had built around his life. But she hadn't known how deep that fear ran. "I didn't lie," she said softly. "I didn't plan this. I'm scared too. But this is ours. This is real. We can figure it out. Together." Her voice trembled, but her gaze did not. She loved him. She wasn't ashamed of that. That only seemed to make him angrier. He paced a few steps away, then back, running a hand through his hair as though trying to erase the world unfolding before him. "You don't understand," he snapped. "I built everything to avoid this. All of this. Attachment. Dependence. Chaos. Family destroys. It ruins. I won't be trapped." She stared at him, stunned. "Trapped? You think a child is a trap?" He turned toward her, and for the first time, there was something almost desperate in his expression, as if he was speaking from a wound that existed long before she had ever entered his life. "Yes," he said. "I do." The clock ticked again. Soft. Merciless. Her fingers tightened around her bag. She could have begged. She could have tried again to explain that love was not a prison, that family was not a cage. She could have reminded him of the nights they had spent tangled together in the dark, whispering about futures they were afraid to name. But something inside her, perhaps the mother she had already become, stood up instead. If I walk out that door, she said quietly, I'm not walking back. For a fraction of a second, she thought he might ask her to stay. His eyes flickered, something raw, something breaking through. But then his fear won. Get out of my house, he said. This time his voice was louder, sharper, final. She stepped back. The floor felt unsteady beneath her feet. The bag felt heavier than her bones. Her heart felt as though it was tearing from the inside, quietly, without sound. She walked out the door. She did not look back. The cold night air hit her like a slap. She wrapped her arms around her stomach. The life inside her moved, just a flutter, just enough to remind her she was not alone. She didn't cry. Because sometimes the pain is too deep for tears. And that night, the house behind her stayed warm and glowing, but the man inside it had already lost everything. He just didn't know it yet. She moved to a different city because she couldn't stay where the memories were. The town she chose was smaller, quieter, with streets lined by bare trees that swayed and shivered in winter wind. The apartment she found was on the third floor of an old brick building that smelled faintly of dust and coffee. The stairwell creaked when she climbed it, and sometimes the heat didn't come on until midday. But it was hers. Not borrowed. Not thrown away. Not something that someone else could take back with a sentence. The pregnancy was harder than she expected. Some mornings she could hardly stand without holding onto the wall. There were nights when she lay awake, one hand on her belly, whispering to the children who had not yet opened their eyes, I will not let the world be cruel to you. I will not let you feel unwanted. I will not let you grow in the cold. The fear was real, but so was the determination. It came from a place deeper than words. She had lost something when she walked out of that house, but she had gained something far more unbreakable, a reason to survive. She found work online. Graphic design, small commissions, freelance advertisements. Not enough to make life easy, but enough to keep the lights on and food in the kitchen. She worked sitting up in bed with her laptop balanced over the curve of her stomach, stretching her aching back every hour. Sometimes tears burned behind her eyes, not from sadness, but from exhaustion. And yet, when she felt the baby's kick, the world steadied again. It reminded her she was not walking through the dark alone. The day the twins were born, the sky outside was gray and heavy, as if winter had wrapped itself around the city. The hospital room was bright, too bright, the walls white and clean and indifferent. The labor was long, and the pain came in waves so intense she thought her bones might splinter. But she held on. She pushed through it. And when the first baby cried, a sound sharp and bright like a crack of light splitting the sky, something inside her broke wide open. When the second baby arrived only minutes later, the room filled with sound. Two voices. Two lives. Two beginnings. They placed the babies in her arms, two tiny bodies wrapped in identical white blankets. They were warm and impossibly small. And their eyes, when they opened them, were blue, clear and bright and familiar. The breath caught in her throat and stayed there. For a moment she couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Could only stare at them and feel the world rearrange itself around these two new hearts. She named the first Sophia. It meant wisdom. Strength of spirit. She named the second Eva. It meant life. The breath of existence. The beginning of something new. Together the names felt like a promise. A prayer. A vow. The nurses told her to rest, but rest was something that lived far from her now. The reality of motherhood arrived all at once, feedings, diapers, waking every 2 hours, rocking one baby while the other cried. The apartment was filled with the soft sound of lullabies and the sharp cries that pierced through every hour of night. Sometimes she sang just to keep herself steady. Sometimes she fell asleep sitting up with one child in her arms and the other curled against her chest. But there were moments too, moments of startling beauty. Sophia's tiny hand curling around her finger. Eva's quiet sighs while sleeping. The gentle warmth of them pressed against her skin. The smell of their hair. The softness of their breaths. Those moments were enough to keep her standing. People in her building began to recognize her. Mrs. Harper from the second floor would bring soup on cold evenings. A teenage boy from the fourth floor would carry her groceries up the stairs without being asked. And slowly the small town felt less empty. Not full. Not easy. But survivable. Kind. Years began to pass, not quickly, but steadily. She watched Sophia and Eva grow. They learned to laugh, to crawl, to walk with their small arms stretched out in triumph. Their hair grew long and gold like sunlight. Their eyes were oceans. And every day, when she looked at them, she saw him. She sometimes wondered if he ever thought of her. If he ever thought of them. If he lay awake in a house filled with silence, unaware that somewhere, two little girls with his eyes were learning to say their first words. But she did not let those questions stay. The past had taken enough from her. She was building something new now. Not perfect. Not stable. Not glamorous. But real. And real is stronger than everything that breaks. 5 years can pass quietly on the outside while tearing something open on the inside. For Andrew, time did not move in seasons or birthdays or holidays, it moved in headlines, contracts, flights, and boardrooms filled with polished tables and people who took notes when he spoke. He built his empire higher and higher, expanding into markets he used to only dream about. His face appeared on magazine covers, in interviews where he spoke about discipline, vision, efficiency. People admired him. Competitors feared him. Investors trusted him. But admiration is a thin substitute for meaning. Every night, when the city quieted and the lights in his penthouse dimmed automatically at midnight, the silence waited for him. He learned to fall asleep with music playing softly in the background because pure silence felt unbearable. His assistant thought it was because he liked noise. It wasn't noise he needed. It was something to drown out the memory of a voice he once loved. He could not recall the exact sound of it anymore, only the warmth of it, and the loss of that warmth haunted him more than any failure ever could. He dated occasionally. Beautiful women, polished, confident, women who knew how to talk about business and strategy and cultural events. He would meet them in elegant restaurants and smile in the polite, distant way that people mistake for depth. They liked him. They liked the idea of him. And every time one of them laughed or reached across the table, he felt the same hollowness inside, a space shaped like something he had destroyed with his own hands. Once, a woman brushed a strand of her hair behind her ear in a way that reminded him of Lily. He froze. His glass almost slipped from his hand. The woman didn't understand why his expression changed, why he stood so abruptly, why he excused himself for the night and never called again. He didn't tell her. He didn't tell anyone. There was one night when he found himself in the nursery section of a department store, without remembering how he had gotten there. Rows of tiny clothes in soft colors, little socks, baby books lined up neatly. He walked slowly down the aisle, feeling like an intruder in a sacred place. A woman nearby was holding her child against her shoulder, rocking gently. The baby made a small cooing sound, so delicate and trusting that it felt like a blow to his chest. His throat tightened. The woman smiled at him kindly, assuming he was a father. He couldn't speak, so he turned away before his voice broke. He threw himself harder into work after that. If he kept moving, kept building, kept climbing, then there would be no space for regret. That was what he believed. Or what he tried to believe. His house remained immaculate. Too large. Too quiet. The echo of his footsteps down the hallway reminded him of emptiness more than success. He had designed one room to be a study with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. People said it must feel powerful to stand there and see everything from above. But all he ever saw was distance. And there were nights, far more than he admitted to himself, when he would stop in the doorway of the guest room at the end of the hall. The room was empty, but he imagined it filled differently. A small bed. Soft toys. Laughter. Mess. Life. The vision lasted only a second before he locked it away, but it came back again every night, uninvited. His friends and colleagues assumed his restlessness was ambition. They thought the sharpness in his tone, the exhaustion in his eyes, came from pushing himself too hard. He let them believe that. The truth was simpler and far more painful. He had built a world that no longer had a place for the most important thing he'd ever touched. Sometimes, late at night, he replayed the moment he shouted at her. Not with pride. Not with certainty. But with the deep, aching confusion of a man who realizes too late that he acted from fear, not clarity. He had been afraid of losing control, afraid of becoming vulnerable, afraid of becoming his father. And in protecting himself from what he feared, he had become the very thing he despised. He wondered where she was now. Whether she was safe. Whether she was alone. Whether she was happy. He wondered if she ever thought of him. He wondered if she hated him. He wondered if she had kept the baby. Sometimes he allowed himself to imagine what the child might look like. And then he forced himself to stop, because hope was too dangerous. But there was one thing he could not stop. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how deeply he buried the thought, he missed her. He missed who he was when he was with her. He missed the part of himself he had thrown away. And he had no idea that somewhere, in a small city he had never bothered to visit, two little girls were growing up with his eyes, his smile, and his laugh, two pieces of his heart living outside of him, waiting for the day fate would bring them back into his world. Winter had a way of making the city feel softer, as if the world had been covered in a quiet blanket that dulled the edges of everything sharp. Snow clung to rooftops, to street lamps, to the bare branches of maple trees lining the sidewalks. People moved slowly, wrapped in heavy coats and scarves, their breaths forming soft clouds in the cold air. Lily liked winter for that reason. It made the world gentle, and gentleness had been something she fought hard to protect. She and the girls had made a ritual of visiting a small cafe on the corner every Saturday morning. It was a cozy place with warm lighting, wooden tables, and the smell of cinnamon and coffee drifting through the air. Sophia and Eva loved it because the barista always gave them extra marshmallows for their cocoa, and because there was a large window where they could watch snowflakes fall and pretend they were tiny stars. That morning felt like any other. The girls sat on either side of Lily, their blonde hair tied in messy braids, their cheeks rosy from the cold. Sophia was carefully decorating a sugar cookie with colored icing, sticking out her tongue in concentration, while Eva insisted her snowman cookie needed just a little more sparkle, which meant an unreasonable amount of sprinkles. Lily watched them with a soft, tired smile, the kind of smile that comes from loving so deeply it aches. She didn't notice him at first. The cafe door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and the sound of muffled traffic. A man stepped inside, brushing snow from the shoulders of his coat. He was tall, his coat a deep charcoal wool, his scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. His hair was a shade of gold that caught the light, and his blue eyes scanned the cafe with the absent awareness of someone looking for a place to sit. He seemed like any other customer on a winter morning. But when he turned his head, something in the air shifted. Lily felt it before she saw him. A pressure in her chest, a sudden stillness. She lifted her eyes, and the world around her seemed to fall away. Time did not stop, but it stretched, slow, heavy, almost fragile. Andrew. He was older, though only by a few years. His features were sharper now, carved by stress and quiet nights without sleep. His posture still held authority, but he looked tired in a way she had never seen before. The confidence he once wore like armor now seemed thinner, cracked at the edges. But his eyes were the same blue she remembered, the same blue that had once felt like home. He saw her. And then he saw them. Sophia looked up first, innocently, smiling as she offered Lily her cookie to admire. Her blue eyes, his eyes, shone with uncomplicated joy. Eva followed, her laughter spilling out as she shook sprinkles onto the table by accident. The resemblance was undeniable. They were mirrors of him in miniature form. Reflections of a life he had once rejected. Andrew stopped breathing for a moment. Not literally, but in the way a person does when the world shifts beneath their feet. His gaze locked on the twins, and something inside him shattered without a sound. There was no confusion, no hesitation, no need for explanation. Recognition was immediate and absolute. The truth hit him with such force that his hands trembled at his sides. He walked toward them slowly, as if each step might break the fragile moment. His expression held so many things at once that Lily could barely read him: shock, disbelief, regret, awe, and something deeper, something raw and aching. He reached the table. Lily's heart pounded so hard she thought the entire room must hear it. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Sophia blinked up at him. "Hi," she said cheerfully, completely unaware of the history swelling around her. His voice came out unsteady, like a man learning how to speak again. "Hello." Eva tilted her head. "You look like us," she announced with the blunt certainty of a child. Lily felt tears press against her throat. Andrew's gaze shifted to Lily. There were no walls in his eyes now, no coldness, no distance. The man who once stood like stone now looked undone. "Lily," he whispered. She could have looked away. She could have run, the way she once had to. But she didn't. She held his gaze, steady and quiet. "Yes," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. She had learned how to be strong. His breathing wavered. "They're mine." It wasn't a question. Lily nodded. The sound that escaped him was not a cry. It was softer, an exhale of grief and wonder and devastation all tangled together. He lowered himself to one knee, not caring who in the cafe might be watching. Sophia reached out and touched his hair, curious. Eva leaned closer. He looked up at them as if they were something holy. "I'm so sorry," he said. The words barely made it past his lips, but they were real. For the first time, he understood exactly what he had lost. And for the first time, Lily saw him not as the man who forced her out into the cold, but as a man standing in the ruins of his own choices, finally ready to see what mattered. The world outside kept snowing. The cafe kept buzzing with quiet conversation. But at that small wooden table, something enormous shifted. Their past didn't disappear. But their future had just changed. He came back the very next day. Not with grand gestures or gifts or apologies rehearsed to sound noble. He simply arrived, standing outside the cafe before it opened, hands buried in the pockets of his coat as his breath clouded in the cold morning air. Lily saw him through the window when she came with the twins, their small hands wrapped in hers, their scarves crooked and wool hats slipping sideways. For a moment she stood perfectly still, unsure of whether she should turn around and walk away. But the girls tugged her forward, and she understood that this moment was no longer about her alone. They sat at the same table. Sophia and Eva, unbothered by adult complexities, began building shapes out of sugar packets while Lily wrapped her hands around a warm mug. Andrew sat across from her. He looked different now, as if something inside him had softened painfully overnight. His shoulders were still broad, his expression still possessed quiet intensity, but it was clear that whatever shield he once held had cracked. He didn't rush to speak. He didn't defend himself. He didn't demand explanations or forgiveness. When he finally did speak, his voice was quiet, steady in the way someone sounds when their chest is full of things they are not sure they have the right to ask for. "Tell me about them." There were 1,000 things he could have said, but he chose that. Not "tell me why you left." Not "why didn't you tell me." Not "how dare you." He chose to ask about the girls first. That mattered. Lily breathed slowly, choosing her words not for his comfort, but for truth. She told him how Eva had walked first, bold and determined, refusing to fall even when her legs wobbled. How Sophia had spoken first, her voice clear, forming words like delicate pearls. How they laughed differently, slept differently, held fears and joys unique to their hearts. She spoke of fevers and lullabies, of small triumphs, of birthdays celebrated with cakes she baked at midnight after finishing work. She didn't mention the nights she cried alone. She didn't need to. Those lived in the silence between her sentences. Andrew listened. Really listened. Not with the polite attentiveness of businessmen or the calculated gaze of someone gathering information. His eyes were steady, open, absorbing everything. Sometimes he closed his hands into fists, not out of anger but to steady himself against the weight of what he had missed. The smallest details seemed to hit him with the greatest force. "So Eva calls the moon her lamp," he repeated quietly, as if learning sacred scripture. "And Sophia thinks music tastes like colors," Lily continued. He nodded, blinking hard. The twins looked up often to show him what they were doing. A drawing, a bead bracelet, a napkin folded into something that only they understood. He answered each of them with full attention, as though their small discoveries were miracles. In his eyes, they were. When they stood to go, Eva lifted her arms toward him without hesitation. Sophia followed a moment later. He froze, breath shaking, before gathering both girls gently into his arms. They fit there naturally, as though they had always belonged in that space. His eyes closed for a moment as he held them. Lily saw a man holding everything he once threw away, now treating it as if it were made of glass. Afterward, he walked them home. Not close, not touching Lily, but matching her pace. The world around them was quiet except for the crunch of snow under their boots. He didn't try to fill the silence with questions or explanations. He carried it with care, understanding how fragile it was. When they reached the building entrance, Sophia and Eva raced up the stairs, laughing. Lily remained at the bottom step, looking at him. "I'm not asking for anything," he said before she could speak. "Not forgiveness, not a place, not a second chance. I know I don't deserve those yet. I just want to be here. To learn them. To try to be someone they don't have to be ashamed of." There was no plea in his voice. No manipulation. Just truth. Unvarnished, unguarded, human. Lily's chest tightened. She had imagined this moment so many times that she had stopped believing it could ever come. Yet here it was, quiet, heavy, real. "You can be in their lives," she said. "But slowly. Carefully. Not as someone who steps in and out when it's convenient. If you come into their hearts, they will not let you leave." His voice broke slightly. "I know." She nodded. Then she added softly, "And if you hurt them, I will never let you in again." This time, he didn't flinch. He simply nodded, accepting the truth as a vow. He looked up the stairs where the girls had disappeared. "I won't leave," he said. Not a promise made to convince. A promise spoken because he finally understood the cost of breaking one. And for the first time since the day she walked out of his house, Lily believed him. Winter turned slowly into early spring, the kind where the snow melts unevenly and leaves patches of green grass showing like soft promises. The air was still cold, but not sharp anymore. There were days when sunlight lingered longer on the windows, and birds returned to sit on the telephone wires outside Lily's apartment. Life did not change all at once, but gradually, in the kind of quiet progression that only becomes noticeable when you pause long enough to look back. Andrew began spending afternoons with the twins. At first, he visited only in public places, the park, the cafe, the library's children's section. He was learning them, not as an idea, not as a symbol of regret or redemption, but as real children with thoughts and flaws and messy joys. Sophia walked beside him while holding onto two of his fingers instead of his whole hand, as if she needed independence but on her own terms. Eva liked to climb playground steps and declare herself queen of the world, which Andrew responded to by bowing solemnly, calling her Your Majesty, while other parents watched with uncertain amusement. At the park, he pushed them on the swings. It was awkward at first, he pushed too softly, then too hard, then had to learn the rhythm of their laughter. Sophia liked slow, even swinging that let her look at the clouds. Eva liked soaring higher, the wind in her face making her squeal. Andrew adjusted to both. Slowly, carefully. He watched them constantly, not with panic but with the attentiveness of someone who knows what it means to lose something once. He began to understand their personalities in ways Lily had learned long ago. Sophia was cautious, thoughtful, always considering the world before stepping into it. Eva was fearless, ready to leap first and consider consequences later. They balanced each other, the quiet wisdom and the wild joy. And as Andrew spent time with them, something inside him began to settle. His movements became gentler. His voice softened without losing strength. The girls didn't change him, they revealed him. Lily watched this from a careful distance. Not coldly, not suspiciously, simply aware. She was learning him again, just as he was learning them. Sometimes she joined the outings, sometimes she let him go alone with them, though those first times caused her heart to stretch painfully in her chest. But he always brought them back safe. He always texted when they were on their way. He always asked if there was a bedtime routine he should follow. And little by little, trust began to grow, not quickly, not blindly, but steadily. There were moments, though, when the past surfaced. One such moment came during a rainy afternoon. They were in Lily's apartment because the weather made the park impossible. Toys covered the living room floor. Sophia had spread out her coloring books, Eva was trying to stack blocks into a tower that would never stand straight, and Andrew was sitting cross-legged on the floor with them, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The twins were laughing about something, a joke only children could understand, when Eva, without warning, said, "Before you came, Mama cried a lot." The words fell into the room with weight. Sophia looked up, her expression thoughtful, not embarrassed, simply honest. "We hugged her," she added softly. The silence that followed was not loud or dramatic. It was fragile. Andrew looked at Lily, and this time his eyes did not avoid the truth. He didn't look ashamed in the shallow way someone does when they want forgiveness. He looked broken in the honest way of someone who finally sees the full shape of what they destroyed. He did not defend himself. He did not say he was different now. He did not say he had reasons. He simply nodded slowly and said, "Thank you for taking care of her." Not an apology. But something deeper, acknowledgement. Lily's throat tightened. She didn't want to cry, but her breath wavered. She looked at the twins, their innocent sincerity, their lack of resentment. They had not learned bitterness. She had kept them safe from that. But she had not been able to protect herself from every wound. "Don't hurt them," she said quietly. "Don't hurt me again." It was not a threat. It was a truth spoken from scar tissue. Andrew leaned forward, resting his hand gently on the floor near hers. Not touching. Just near. Close enough to say, "I hear you." "I won't," he answered. The words were simple, but they carried weight that came from somewhere deep, somewhere real. The rain tapped softly against the windows, a steady rhythm like breathing. The girls went back to playing. The tension eased. Life continued. And in the small, everyday acts, tying shoes, wiping sticky fingers, laughing at half-understood jokes, something fragile and powerful began forming between them. Not reconciliation. Not yet. But the beginning of something new. Something growing. Something alive. Something that could, one day, be whole. Spring matured into early summer, and the city seemed to breathe more deeply, as if it too had survived something. The trees bloomed, the river thawed, and children filled the parks with running footsteps and laughter. With each passing week, the rhythm of their lives shifted, subtly, but undeniably. Andrew was no longer just a visiting presence, he had become a familiar one. The twins expected him. They called his name when they saw something interesting, when they fell down, when they laughed at something only they found funny. Their affection came naturally, without hesitation, without caution. Children do not withhold love. They give it freely, believing the world will hold them. But Lily had learned caution. She knew how quickly love could be torn away. She knew how silence could cut deeper than shouting. So she watched. And she measured. And she waited to see if this was real, if it would last, if the man standing before her now was the same man who once shut her out, or someone new entirely. There came a day that made this question clearer. It was a warm afternoon, and they had gathered in the park for a picnic. The twins ran barefoot in the grass, chasing butterflies and each other in circles. Lily sat on a blanket beneath a large oak tree, sorting snacks into small bowls. Andrew helped, though he was more focused on watching the girls than on handing her the strawberries she'd asked for twice. "Andrew," she said at last, unable to help the small laugh in her voice, "the strawberries?" He blinked as if waking from a dream, looked down at the bowl in his hands, and handed it to her with a sheepish shake of his head. "Right. Yes." There was a softness in that small mistake, a gentleness that didn't exist before. The man who once lived entirely in control now allowed himself to be distracted by something joyful. Sophia came running toward them, holding a flower. "For you," she announced, thrusting it toward Andrew instead of Lily. It was a small, uneven wildflower, its stem slightly crushed from her grip. Andrew took it as though she'd handed him something priceless. He didn't just tuck it aside, he tied it carefully through one of his coat buttonholes, as if it belonged there permanently. Sophia beamed. Lily saw something flicker in her chest, warmth, sharp and tender at once. Eva ran up next, dirt smudged on her knees, grass in her hair, and declared loudly that she had caught the biggest bug in the entire world. Andrew knelt to look at it without flinching. His expression was serious and awestruck, as though the tiny beetle truly was a marvel of nature. Eva glowed with pride. Lily watched all of this with a quiet ache. Not a painful one, more like a memory of pain, softened by time. Later, while the girls chased fireflies near the trees, Lily and Andrew remained sitting on the blanket. The sunlight filtered through green leaves overhead, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The air was warm, and the world felt suspended in a peaceful pause. Andrew broke the silence. "I've been thinking," he said, voice measured. "About that night. When you told me. And I. His throat tightened, as though the words themselves were heavy. I didn't understand that fear could make someone cruel. But I was cruel. And I've regretted it every day since. Lily didn't interrupt. She didn't rescue him from the discomfort of saying it. She let him speak. I thought love would trap me. I thought becoming a father would take everything I had built. I didn't understand that it would have given me something I was missing. He stared down at his hands, which were steady now. I didn't know how to be loved without feeling like I was losing control. And I hurt you because of it. Lily breathed slowly. Her heart didn't race this time. It simply listened. You did hurt me, she said gently. You changed everything in one moment. I had to learn how to stand again. He nodded. I know. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't want to erase what happened. I want to build something new beside it. Something better. She looked at him then, not at the version of him she had once loved, but the man he had fought to become. His eyes were still blue, still steady, but no longer cold. They held something vulnerable, something she had never seen in him before. What do you want, Andrew? She asked quietly. Not to test him. Not to trap him. To understand. He exhaled, slow and raw. I want to be here. Not halfway. Not visiting. I want to wake up knowing my daughters are growing in a world I'm part of. I want to share responsibility. To help you. To learn with you. To build a home with you both, not the home I used to believe in, but a real one. A long silence stretched between them. Not tense. Not uncertain. Sacred. Sophia and Eva laughed in the distance, spinning in circles under the trees, their hair catching the light like strands of gold. Lily looked at them, and then back at him. You don't get to erase the past, she said softly. But you can choose what you do now. And so can I. He nodded once. A quiet, steady acceptance. She leaned back on her hands, letting sunlight warm her face. We build slow, she said. Not rushed. Not fragile. Real. Something changed then, not a grand declaration, not a kiss, not an embrace. Something quieter. Deeper. They didn't need to say that this was the beginning of something. It already was. Summer faded into autumn, the air turning crisp and bright, leaves shifting to gold and amber. Change happened gently, not through a single dramatic moment, but through the slow shaping of days. There were small things first. Andrew began leaving a spare sweater at Lily's apartment. Jason-style drawings from the twins ended up pinned to his office wall. His phone lock screen changed to a picture of Sophia asleep on his shoulder and Eva tangled in his scarf like a mischievous kitten. None of it was spoken aloud. None of it was declared. Life had simply begun to knit them together in quiet, unquestionable ways. He found a house. Not like the one he once lived in, cold, echoing, immaculate. This one sat near a lake at the edge of the town, where the water reflected the sky in still ripples. The house had soft white walls, warm wood floors, and wide windows that filled the rooms with sunlight. It was peaceful in a way that didn't demand silence. It felt like the beginning of something rather than a memory of someone else's past. He didn't tell Lily immediately. He waited, learning stillness, learning patience. The Andrew who once demanded control now understood that love was something that could only grow if given freedom. One afternoon, while the twins were in the middle of constructing a grand pillow fort in the living room, he asked if she would take a walk with him. The question was soft, easy, without pressure. She agreed, though her eyes flickered with questions unspoken. The path to the lake was lined with tall grasses and wildflowers just past bloom. Leaves underfoot made a gentle rustling sound. They walked without hurry, side by side, their steps falling into natural rhythm. For a while, they didn't speak at all. The silence between them had changed over time. It was no longer something tense and fragile. It was steady, shared, companionable. When the house came into view, Lily stopped. The structure stood simple and unpretentious, with a wide porch and a sloping roof, surrounded by a yard big enough for bare feet and running laughter. There was nothing dramatic about it, nothing imposing. It simply looked like a place meant for living. Andrew didn't look at the house. He looked at her. "I didn't buy it to replace anything," he said quietly. "I didn't choose it to erase the past or pretend it didn't happen. I wanted to build something that starts from now. Something whole. Something real. With you. With them. Not as an apology. As a future." Lily didn't speak immediately. Her heart felt full and fragile at the same time, like something new being born. She walked toward the porch and placed her hand on the wooden railing. It was smooth, warm from the sun. She imagined the twins running barefoot across the lawn, hearing their laughter echo between the trees. She imagined mornings where sunlight poured into the kitchen. She imagined evenings where no one was alone. She imagined peace. When she turned to face him again, there were no tears in her eyes, only recognition. Not relief, not disbelief, recognition of a truth she had not allowed herself to believe until now. He had changed. Not because she asked him to, not because life forced him to, but because love handled him gently and slowly, reshaping him from the inside out. "We'll move slowly," she said softly. He nodded. "As slowly as you want." She stepped closer. Their hands brushed. Not clasping, not holding, just touching. But that small contact felt like the closing of one story and the beginning of another. The move wasn't perfect. The twins cried when they realized they wouldn't see Mrs. Harper from the second floor every morning. Lily had to sort through boxes filled with pieces of a life lived in survival mode. Andrew learned how to assemble furniture with minimal swearing. Eva attempted to help by handing him screws in random emotional order. Sophia labeled every drawer in careful handwriting, sometimes misspelling the words in ways that made them laugh. On the first night in the new house, they didn't have everything put away. The kitchen table was still unassembled. The living room held half-open boxes. The girls fell asleep in a pile of blankets, curled together like two halves of one dream. Lily sat beside them on the floor. Andrew sat beside her. The house was quiet, but not empty. Lily rested her head against his shoulder. This time, he didn't freeze. He didn't overthink. He simply leaned gently against her, matching her breath without trying to own it. Outside, the lake shimmered under moonlight. Leaves rustled softly in the wind. The world felt steady, real, alive. Their story didn't end with forgiveness. It didn't end with a kiss. It didn't end with perfection. It began with presence. With choosing, again and again, in small quiet moments. Love didn't return. It grew, slowly, tenderly, from everything they had survived. And this time, it was strong enough to stay.